He requested permission to come and teach at the school, and I duly accepted, and we've been friends ever since. So I appreciate it, Lee, for you having me tonight. I guess I can just talk briefly about the trip. My desire to travel and see the Silk Road really started when I was a kid, but I was given my first opportunity to travel by the Rotary Club of Tumut. And for a young sort of teenage lad, I had a notion that I wanted to travel, but you perhaps don't have the means or the wherewithal to know how to go about having that experience. And the local Rotary Club approached me, or I approached them, and we worked on getting me overseas together. It wasn't all that easy. I remember a couple of the local Rotary fellas came along to my home and had the interview with Mum and Dad, and we sat down and talked about whether it was feasible or not, and I was all excited and didn't see how it would ever be a problem. And in the end, Mum and Dad said, well, look, because of Mum's illness at the time, they didn't think they'd be able to host another student in return, which is, of course, a responsibility for a parent sending a child overseas. And I was really disappointed by that. But the two Rotary fellas said, no, look, that wouldn't be a problem. Our club could host a student in return. So if you're not in a position to host, then we won't let that be an obstacle. So they were really accommodating. And then after the meeting, Dad sat me down and said, look, Phil, we're just not in a position to be able to afford to send you overseas. And I was devastated because I was all geared up to go. And he said, look, if you want to go, you have to get a job. And I hadn't actually thought of that before. It hadn't even entered my mind. So I had to put the exchange idea on hold for another year and go and get my first job at KFC, which allowed me to save up the money to head overseas. So I have your organisation to thank for my first experience of travelling and seeing the world, and what it ultimately does is, perhaps anybody who's travelled knows, it opens your eyes and gives you the opportunity, especially learning a language as we do through the Rotary Youth Exchange. It gives you an opportunity to see the world from a different perspective, to know that there are in fact different realities which exist, which as a young person you haven't even contemplated before. So that was a real privilege. This last trip I've been doing came just from a desire to travel, to I guess go on a bit of an adventure I dreamed of since I was a kid, and I wanted to attach a story to my trip. I knew that I wanted to come back here to Belgium to catch up with my host families again, and it's been 11 years now since I left. But I didn't know how to get here. And eventually someone said to me, look, why don't you do the Silk Road? And I looked into it and researched the Silk Road, what it was all about, and I thought, well, that's perfect for me. It allowed me to follow a story, to follow people like of course Marco Polo, the Chinese monk who travelled to India in search of the Buddhist scrolls, guys like Genghis Khan even, which I idolise even more, and Alexander the Great. So to be able to link my trip with the Chinese Empire, all that I was able to see in China and Eastern China, and what I saw in the West, in the Roman Empire and in Turkey and what have you, and to know that somehow these seemingly disparate cultures and people were in some way linked by this history was a genuine privilege. And perhaps you've seen some of the images around the room tonight that I sent to Lee, just of some of the people and the faces and what have you from that part of the world. It's very, very isolated. It was for the largest part of the 20th century. A lot of those Central Asian nations there, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, these places were cut off from the world by the Soviet Empire, and so we were unable to see them. Since, of course, yesterday 20 years ago, the fall of the Berlin Wall, we now have access into all of these countries, and in fact, I can say now, having been there, that they're not as remote and isolated as perhaps we may think, especially places like Uzbekistan with the famous cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, which are quintessential Silk Road cities, full of 14th century Islamic architecture and exquisite buildings, history and heritage. There are tourists starting to come to these places in busloads, and on the one hand it's unfortunate, but on the other hand this is what opens places up. And in fact, I think this whole notion of globalization is a real benefit for a lot of these countries. They've still got a long way to go developmentally, but they're embracing tourism, and in fact, for a single traveller like me on the road as I was, every country I went to, I was humbled by the hospitality, by the warmth and the welcome which I was given, whether it was high up in the mountains where people only live in summertime, springtime, or on Afghan borders, which we're supposed to be at war with. People were genuinely hospitable, and it was a real experience of humanity which has absolutely humbled me and made me realize that I have a duty to return that type of hospitality which I've been given in my own life. So
Phil?
That's the secret in a nutshell, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Good. You also travelled down into Africa and met up with Elisa. Yes. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And I there's two parts that I think I personally found very interesting. Is one, the study that you did on HIV and the role of the witch doctors, and please tell us about the Good Brother.
Okay, I will do that. So first of all, a friend of mine, an old high school friend of mine who was also a student of Leeds, contacted me while I was on the Silk Road. She's a doctor based in Melbourne. She's now working for the Burness Institute, and she had a long-standing affiliation with the Christian Brothers. I'm not really sure how it started, but she had worked in a health clinic of theirs in Nairobi, in a slum of Nairobi in Africa, on a number of occasions. She'd been back and forth to Kenya. They asked her to conduct a needs analysis or a analysis of a health clinic they were running on the ground in southern Sudan. And at that point she asked me to go along and join her, and so we both went along to check this thing out. Basically, the Christian Brothers got into HIV healthcare provision initially on a fairly casual basis. They were working in a community. The Christian Brothers traditionally are teachers, and they realized that the HIV/AIDS epidemic in this community was substantial, and many of the parishioners of their church were HIV/AIDS sufferers. So they wanted to provide some sort of pastoral care, which they did. They provided a forum where they could come and talk about their illness, how they were dealing with it, all of this sort of thing. Given the epidemic was so substantial, the numbers in the small support group quickly grew and grew. They provided a meal to them once a week. And before they knew it, they had over 100 people coming along and getting a free meal, and participating in the support group. They then realised these people needed drugs and better health care, so they started providing a basic level of basic drugs. And then of course it becomes much more complex. HIV/AIDS is a complex illness, and it has a complex treatment. So this whole thing snowballed, if you like. They applied to the South Sudanese government, the fledgling South Sudanese government, since 2005, they signed the peace deal with the North, and they're trying to establish themselves. They provided a nurse, and this nurse was providing medical treatment in the clinic. This nurse was extremely poorly trained. The Christian brothers themselves had absolutely no medical training or background, and this is why we had to go in there to try and assess the situation. I guess if I can just say, to stress the importance of working in these types of communities with complex illnesses, as perhaps Rotary has done across the world with polio. The criticality of having properly trained staff, of sending proper health messages to the people, and making sure that you have a duty of care from the outset that is clear and well defined and that you adhere to. We found in this particular instance in South Sudan that some of the AIDS messages getting out to these people were highly inadequate. They were confused. The Christian brothers were not promoting condom use, which is clearly one of the most effective ways of stopping the disease. And this posed a real problem. The messages amongst the Christian brothers themselves were often mixed to the community, and often the community found themselves very much confused about how they were to deal with their illness and how they were to prevent others getting it. There were issues of stigma and all these sorts of things which needed to be broken down as well. That's an organisational side of things, which perhaps is easier to deal with. The other problem is dealing with people who I found, we both found actually, basically took control of a program and assumed it as their own, and all of a sudden the program sort of became the Brother X program, and it no longer stood really. It no longer stood for the patients and the people that it was supposed to be serving, because this particular brother in question quite bizarrely pursued an agenda which was completely, I guess, his own, with local bishops, with local parish priests, with local schools and community groups and NGOs and all these sorts of things that were working in the area. And we had a great deal of difficulty trying to bring him on side and really focus the program, the needs of the program, on the people that it's supposed to be serving in the first place.
Phil, the witch doctors, and when we spoke the other day,
yeah,
the reality of having to deal with them.
Yes, the witch doctors were offering a cure for AIDS, which is quite incredible actually. I don't know why the World Health Organization isn't getting in there and talking to these witch doctors, but apparently they had a cure for AIDS, and these types of claims from witch doctors really undermined a lot of the health messages that the UN, who were in there at the time, the World Health Organization, who were in there at the time, Red Cross, World Vision. This community in southern Sudan was well served for international health organizations, but countering this type of traditional medicine was very difficult, and people would pay. These are people without means, but who would pay a lot of money to go and see these witch doctors to cure themselves of HIV and AIDS, and who wouldn't take the proper medical precautions, such as the medication they needed to take every single day without fail, condom use, all this sort of thing. They would choose to go to the witch doctor because it was easier, and they were more comfortable and familiar with it. And Western medicine in hospitals is still something that they're a little bit wary of. So any program, it needs to at least acknowledge that these witch doctors are there, the people in these communities are there in this type of capacity, and in fact have to bring them on side, as was done at one stage by the health service. Brought on all of the local tribal chiefs, in 60 or 80 odd chiefs in this one particular area, and worked out a strategy along with these chiefs. if you're able to do the same with these witch doctors, then they're getting financial reward out of offering this cure for AIDS, so that has to be acknowledged. But also their status in the community, you need to perhaps bring them on as some sort of allied health worker, but who at least acknowledges the welfare of their people, and to cooperate with these witch doctors is really important.
Phil, just following your journey through the Silk Road, it struck me that wherever you went there was a disaster. Did you cause those disasters?
Well, perhaps at the start I did, but the catastrophes and the disasters soon overtook me. I left Vietnam, and not long afterwards they had, this was in 2007, they had all of the floods, these terrible floodings and storms that hit Vietnam. There were the Tibetan protests just after I came out of the mountains, and I was still in China, in Western China, when I was looking at the internet and seeing that the town and some of the friends that I'd made while I was in this Tibetan village were protesting, and the monks uprising in this Tibetan, this holy Tibetan town against the Chinese regime, and what the Dalai Lama has termed a cultural genocide, which I could see for myself was really quite profound. The catastrophes continued, the Uyghur uprising in Western China just after I left, and all this sort of thing, but unfortunately they caught up to me when I was in Turkmenistan, and I got beaten up by a couple of guys in Turkmenistan, and that wasn't a happy experience, but the British Embassy were wonderful and they really helped me up. And then they overtook me, and I guess the war in Georgia between the Russians and the Georgians, about this time last year actually, was just before I ended up going in there. So I spent a little bit of time in the refugee camp there in Gori, and did a little bit of work with, of all things, an Israeli aid organisation who were working with kids who had suffered from trauma and all of this sort of thing. So yeah, it wasn't without its catastrophes and disasters. Some of them perhaps I caused, but others I followed.
Phil, I'm conscious of the fact you've got. He's telling me a story. He's got to take a little old lady on give her a lift somewhere. I don't believe him, but anyway, he's working to a time little old lady, I can imagine. Just to give people a chance to ask some questions, I think. You can be heard from there. Lionel.
Phil, could you tell us something about Hospitals Without Borders and how it fits into the Rotary organisation?
Yeah, with pleasure, Lionel. Look, it's just something that I've cottoned on to the last couple of weeks through my old host Rotary Club here in Namur, and one of my old the Rotary fellas that I was quite close to at the time put it to me. He knew I was looking for work, and he said, look, we started this Hospitals Without Borders about 15 years ago through our club, Rotary Club of Namur Confluent. And these guys, basically the organisation provides hospital supplies and medical equipment to hospitals in need and in emergency areas right across the globe: Africa, Asia, Central and South America, even Eastern Europe. It's really quite an extraordinary achievement to come out of a single club. They were able to. They now have all of the Rotary clubs of Belgium online with this Hospitals Without Borders program, who are helping fund the program and provide logistical support. When they send this medical equipment out, they send it on empty cargo ships, on empty aeroplanes, free of charge. The gentleman who is the main driver behind this program is a man of a considerable, means and contacts himself at ambassadorial levels and this sort of thing. So in that regard, they've been fortunate. But also through the Rotary network themselves across the globe, they are able to make the greatest use of your Rotary network and really cut down on costs at a whole range of different levels, and the type of wherewithal that Rotarians have, and the go-get-'em type attitude that exists in a lot of these areas. So they've made tremendous use of that. I'm really interested in the program, and I'm hoping to speak with the gentleman who's running it later this week and put a couple of things to him and learn a little bit more about the program myself, and see whether he's interested in taking somebody on. The problem that the program has at the moment is that this gentleman is in his 70s. He has heart trouble, and the Rotary Club of Nambour have been quite worried for some time about how the program is going to continue after he's no longer able to support it. At the moment, this guy's doing 12-hour days, and he's stacking boxes himself and loading them onto trucks himself and all this sort of thing, and it's really not sustainable for too much longer. So personally, I'd like to try and help out there and see what I can do. If from your end, and of course we can perhaps communicate more, and I can outline the program more in detail via a letter. But if you are at all interested in learning more about this program, and perhaps what Rotary in Australia can do to support what I think actually could gain funding from the Bill Gates Foundation, having given money to Rotary internationally for a range of different programs. The Bill Gates Foundation hasn't given money to this program, but I dare say it's because they didn't know it existed. Perhaps there's a little bit of American-centric giving there. I don't know. That's only speculation. But because this comes from a little old Belgium, and also the French-speaking part of Rotary, I cannot see how this is not a worthy Rotary program of supporting at an international level. It's really done extraordinary things in 15 years. I've given Lee the website. You can have a look yourself.
Yeah, and I posted for instance, the letter that you wrote back for Russ about the value of Rotary Youth Exchange. I've posted that on our website. People, rather than take the time tonight. But one question I'd like to know is, you were in Iran for a while. How do the people feel about their government? Because it's big over here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say, and it's without any reservation or rose-coloured glasses, that the Iranian people were some of the most extraordinary people I have ever come across in all of the Silk Road trip, and even in Australia and New Zealand. There you go. The Iranians would approach me in the street as a backpacker, out of complete curiosity, genuine interest in who I was, where I was from, what I was doing there. Even many of them thinking I was American, and we all know the antagonism between the two states. Genuinely interested to just listen to me, and hear my story. So I've got a real soft spot for the Iranians, and travelling to the country, I learned how the messages that we get via our mainstream media, how really they only focus on one thing. They may be inaccurate or they may be accurate, but they focus on the politics and the relationship at the political level between ourselves and states such as Iran. Once you get beneath that, and obviously into the community, you quickly learn that Iranians themselves are obviously just like us, an old cliche, but that they don't necessarily share the same views as Ahmadinejad, the Ayatollah, the mullahs and the imams, who themselves, we've seen in the last couple of months, are quite divided on a number of issues, which is absolutely fascinating. And the Iranians, 60% of whom are 30 years old or less, are really at a point now where they want and are starting to demand more from their government, even at an economic level. The unemployment is extremely high. whether it's due to sanctions or poor governance. The economy is not in a good shape. They're heavily reliant on oil, and Iranians, of course, want more. And in the election that you saw recently, these protests, you saw this type of malcontent within the community. Of course, speaking out in Iran is dangerous. You pay for it with your life potentially, and so there's a terrible risk at any sort of peaceful protest or otherwise against the current regime as it is. What I think the Iranians learned from this recent election process was that they're not, as individuals, they're not the only ones who are dissatisfied with their government. But secondly, they do not have a leader behind whom they can galvanize support and follow. So I think in the next years, and we have to say years, 5, 10, it may even be more, but they will be now working towards identifying who these leaders are in an underground type of way, unfortunately, but who these types of leaders are that can bring them out of this rather oppressive regime they're living under at the moment.
We're going to have to move to close off now, and because you've got to get away. But
I've still got about 15 minutes,
yeah.
But obviously you've got a meeting as well.
Yeah, that's right. But Phil, is peace possible across this globe? Big question. Short answer.
Yeah, I think one thing I actually I came to learn, and I had no idea of this before I left, was actually this may sound controversial, but capitalism as an economic model, I think within capitalism lies the solution to a lot of these types of conflict issues and poverty issues and many of the things we talk about. I think the capitalist model that we've evolved up until now is still yet to evolve. It's gone through a phase, as we all know, of exploitation throughout the 19th and 20th centuries of the African, Asian, and South American continent. But in fact, this buzzword that we're all hearing about now, sustainability, and this focus on a more durable economic model is what is going to lift a lot of these countries out of poverty. If we're able to just provide the framework for Africans who, in the south of Sudan, 3 years ago they came out of horrible civil war. They're all running around with mobile phones and trying to set up businesses for themselves and all of this sort of thing. People want a certain standard of living. They don't necessarily want the riches that we have in the West. I think that's a common misconception of ourselves, that they all want the same standard of living and there's not enough to go around. They just want basic needs provided for. As soon as that happens, then people have something to lose in a lot of these places. As soon as they have something to lose, then they will, I think, be more inclined to want to engage and overcome some of these conflict issues that we have. And I mean, of course, you have to stay positive, but peace is possible, and you only have to look to humanity itself. And look beyond, in fact, the political machinations that are at the core of the conflict around the planet, and see that the people themselves have no animosity towards travellers such as me. I can only speak from that personal perspective, and in fact, I never felt it danger at any time, and I was humbled by the fact that we're all so similar, yeah. And we, none of us really want to be at war with our neighbours at all. And it goes for countries that have just come out of civil war, and ostensibly you'd say that wasn't the case, but you have to experience it to know, perhaps.
Phil, I'm going to wind up the connection now. It's gone very, very well. If I have a really strong thing, I would love to have seen your mum here tonight. and your dad, Moy and Steve,
Yeah,
and John
Yeah,
and
me too.
Francis, and that would have been great. I don't often get too serious when I talk with you, but I'm very proud of what you've done, and I think that comes across to all of us. So we'd like to express our gratitude for what you're doing and giving you time to be in Nambour, be it cyber-wise. I'd ask you to show us. Bonjour.
Thanks very much, Lee.
Hmm?
Thanks very much, Lee, and thank you to your club. And obviously, as I said in my letter, I wouldn't even be here, literally wouldn't be here at the moment anyway if it weren't for Rotary. And so I appreciate everything your organisation has given to me and what it's allowed me to do. I'm very happy, and much of it is due to your organisation. So if in some way I'm able to return the investment in me and put it back into your organisation, or indeed some of the works that you are involved with, then it will be my pleasure, and we'll work on that. Keep in mind what I mentioned about this Hospitals Without Borders. If it sounds like a goer for you guys there in Nambour and Rotary Australia, then I would be happy to pursue it as quickly as possible over here and look at perhaps how we can expand this program from a one-man show, which has done incredible things internationally, again. So keep that in mind. There you go, food for thought.
Thanks, Phil. My problem now is I don't know how to turn it off. But anyway, Phil, good night.
Yep. Okay, good night. Have a good meeting, folks, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Ciao.